Some nights are silent, but that silence is actually a calling. Sometimes the past never stops knocking. James and his family gather, as they do every year, at his grandfather's old mansion to spend New Year's Eve together. The mansion sits in the middle of a snow-covered estate, miles from town, isolated and silent. This year, the air feels heavier than usual, the cold seeping through the walls, the wind whistling faintly around the window frames. At exactly 11:45 p.m., 3 hard knocks shatter the quiet of the house. James instinctively stands to answer, but his grandfather leaps from his chair and grabs his arm. "Don't open it," he says, his voice shaky but firm. "You don't open the door to something you don't know." The family exchanges uneasy glances as the knocking grows faster and louder, the wooden door creaking under the force, as if someone or something is desperate to get in. James's mom mutters, "Maybe someone's hurt, maybe they need help," but the doubt in her voice mirrors the fear they all feel. No one moves. Then a shadow glides past the window, tall, thin, human-like, but its movements are off, almost drifting with the wind. James and his cousin Ethan creep toward the window, hearts pounding. Outside, in the moonlight-drenched yard, a man stands alone, wearing a tattered old coat, his face pale, eyes sunken. His hands are stuffed in his pockets, head tilted slightly, just standing there. "Who is that?" James whispers. His grandfather slumps into his chair, covering his face with trembling hands. "That was my brother," he says, barely audible. "Henry. He froze to death in this house's basement 40 years ago. We locked the door by mistake. He couldn't get out. We couldn't save him." The family listens, frozen in place, as the door suddenly creaks open a few inches. No one touched it. A sharp, icy gust rushes in. The candles on the table flicker and die one by one. The fireplace hisses and goes dark. The power cuts out, plunging the house into blackness. An old wall clock, silent for years, begins to chime midnight, its sound echoing through the stillness. Grandpa clutches James's arm and slams the door shut, twisting the lock with all his strength. At that moment, a hoarse, raspy voice rises from the other side. "I'm cold. Let me in." It doesn't sound fully human, more like a groan carried by the wind. James's heart races as Ethan whispers, "This can't be real. Grandpa, are you sure?" Grandpa doesn't answer, just buries his head in his hands, eyes wide with terror. No one sleeps that night. At dawn, the family gathers the courage to open the door. In the yard, barefoot tracks mark the snow, leading right up to the doorstep, then stopping abruptly. But what stops them cold is an old weathered photograph lying there. James picks it up. It's Grandpa and a young man, shoulder to shoulder, smiling. Grandpa takes it with shaking hands. This is the only picture I ever had with Henry," he says, "but I haven't seen it in years. It was in a box in the basement." The family stares in stunned silence until James's little sister Lily lets out a scream from inside. They rush back to the living room. There, scrawled on the wall above the fireplace in jagged coal-black letters, are the words, "You won't leave me this time." The writing looks like a child's, uneven and crude, but there's no coal in the room, and the fireplace has been cold for hours. Grandpa collapses to his knees, whispering, "He's still here, and this time he's not leaving." Some questions have no answers. Or maybe we just have to wait. But what about him? Did he return after all these years? Or was he still a wandering spirit? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. On New Year's Eve, 10-year-old James, 8-year-old Noah, and their 6-year-old little sister Emily sat by the fireplace, cradling mugs of hot chocolate. The family was gathered in the cozy living room of their old house. The fire crackled softly, while the wind rattled the windows outside. James looked up from his mug and asked, "Mom, Dad, is Santa Claus real?" Noah and Emily turned to their parents with wide, curious eyes. Their mom, Eleanor, smiled and said, "Of course he is. Santa always comes for good kids." Their dad, Michael, lit his pipe and added, "But if you're naughty, all you'll get is coal, so watch out." The kids giggled, though a spark of wonder lingered in their expressions. As the clock neared midnight, the doorbell rang, a sharp, piercing sound that echoed through the quiet house. The kids jumped, startled. "Who's that at this hour?" Michael muttered, rising from his chair and heading to the door. Eleanor shrugged. Maybe a neighbor stopping by for New Year's, but her voice carried a faint unease. When Michael opened the door, a tall man in a red suit stood there. His black boots gleamed, his white beard was neatly trimmed, and his clothes were spotless. He held a large black sack in one hand. "Good evening," he said warmly. "I've brought gifts for the little ones." James shouted from the living room, "Is that Santa?" Noah and Emily raced to the door. Eleanor chuckled. "He's probably joking," but Michael seemed taken aback by the man's calm confidence. "It's cold out there. Why don't you come in and warm up?" he offered. Eleanor nodded. "Yeah, join us for dinner. There's plenty of room at the table." The man tilted his head with a smile. "Thank you, I'd be delighted," he said, stepping inside. In the living room, the fire still burned, and the table was set with a New Year's feast. Turkey, mashed potatoes, and desserts. The man set his sack by the door and took a seat. "What's your name?" Michael asked, picking up his fork. The man smiled calmly. "They call me Klaus," he replied, his voice smooth but oddly chilly. "Like Santa Claus?" Noah asked, giggling. Klaus narrowed his eyes slightly. "Exactly like that," he said, reaching for his plate. Dinner passed slowly, the air growing strangely tense. Klaus spoke little, his every move deliberate, almost rehearsed. Eleanor, curious, asked, "Where'd you get that outfit?" "It's amazing." Klaus set his fork down. "It's an old tradition," he said. "I wear it to make kids happy." James piped up, "So where are the gifts?" Klaus glanced at his sack. "After dinner," he said with a faint smirk. "Be patient." When the meal ended, Klaus leaned back in his chair. "Time for the gifts," he announced, pulling his sack closer. The kids crowded around, buzzing with excitement. From the sack, Klaus produced 3 packages, brightly wrapped with ribbons. He handed James a race car, Noah a robot, and Emily a doll. The kids tore into them, squealing with delight as Klaus finished his meal, watching with that same calm smile. "I hope you like them," he said softly. But then Eleanor frowned, rubbing her temple. "What's that smell?" she murmured. Michael swayed in his seat, blinking hard. Klaus reached into his sack again, this time pulling out a small spray can. "What's that?" Michael barked, but Klaus sprayed it into the air and dropped it on the table. A sharp chemical stench filled the room. The kids, still clutching their gifts, started coughing. Emily's doll slipped from her hands as she collapsed. Eleanor screamed, "Run!" but her voice faltered. Michael slammed the table, trying to stand, but his legs gave out. Klaus's low, "Ho, ho, ho," chuckle was the last thing they heard as their vision faded. The house fell silent for hours. The fire died out, the food on the table turned cold. Morning came, and a neighbor, noticing the open door, called the police. They found Eleanor and Michael sprawled in the living room, breathing but unconscious. Searching the house, they climbed to the kids' rooms. There, they discovered James, Noah, and Emily, dead in their beds, their organs removed, their faces frozen in terror as they clung to their gifts. The race car, robot, and doll were stained with blood. Klaus, the sack, and the spray were gone. The only traces were a single black boot print on the windowsill and a half-eaten plate on the table. Santa had finished his meal in peace. No other kids vanished in town that night, but every New Year's Eve, when a doorbell rings, families hesitate before answering. Some gifts should never be opened. Some guests should never be let inside. This year, think twice before answering the door. And remember, in Joseph City, the paranormal never ends. For more videos like this, subscribe to the channel and like the video.